Anybody can reach mastery and expertise if they are taught in...
Philippa Hardman, Cambridge University scholar, learning scientist, creator, and founder of DOMS.
Anybody can reach mastery and expertise if they are taught in the right way. And that requires us to rethink the relationship between learning and content. The way that I always put it with my students, and I think there's a lot here that we can learn, by the way, from game design, but is serve content as a side dish. Like, what's the thing that the learner is going to do in order to demonstrate the knowledge and skills you want them to show, to develop, and then think, well, what content is required to help them get there, given where they're starting and who they are or whatever. Think of content like a games manual. When you start a board game, you don't read the 300-page manual. You pick it up in the moment of need because then it has relevance and value, then you put it back down and you continue on the journey.
Phil, thank you so much for joining today. I'm so excited to have you. You know, I remember we met probably a year and 9 months ago now. We connected through LinkedIn serendipitously, and then we had a virtual coffee chat and realized we both had really lots of shared interests around learning design, technology, and so on. And since then, you've launched a really successful course. You're cooking up something really interesting on your end. We've obviously been growing Sparkwise. And anyways, it's been really good to follow your journey and get to talk to you today.
Yeah, same. And thanks so much for the invitation. I've really enjoyed following your work since we first met. And it's great to get this chance to talk about the thing we love most, which is learning design.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, you know, I've really seen you create incredible thought leadership around learning design over the past year and a half that I've been following you. And being at the forefront of experimenting with AI and learning design and really leading the charge in applying that tool into this field. I guess, first of all, I want to ask you, what got you interested in learning design in the first place?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually, it's one that I don't think about very much anymore because it's been so long. But actually, it was as an educator. So my background is in higher education. I'm still affiliated scholar at Cambridge, but I spent a lot of time teaching during my PhD, which was back in the day, which I did at Sheffield University on a topic that I'm not sure even exists anymore. I think it still does, but digital humanities, which was essentially the study of how technology might impact how we research and basically disseminate access to things like historical resources. And so at that point in time, you can imagine, like, I was very interested in technology, but also in pedagogy. Both thinking about, well, how do these new emerging technologies that were emerging at the time, so things like cloud computing, and like the democratization of coding and this kind of thing, how is that going to impact how we teach? But also, I just wanted to be a great teacher. And one thing I noticed is actually that I was not trained to be a teacher. So there was this assumption that therefore you can teach. So because I had an undergrad and a master's in history, in my case, I was assumed to be a great teacher of history and was teaching for many years. But I was expected to learn on the job. And I think what that highlighted for me was the fact that the definition of learning is often, if we think about it at all, I think sometimes it's just kind of invisible, this concept that you design learning and that you in the way that you might design any experience. But this concept was very little talked about, but it was also, if it was talked about, we kind of assumed that information equals learning. And so I got very much into the study of learning science, so the sciences behind what is it that actually gets people's attention, that enables them to take on new information, change behavior, and this kind of thing. I got very interested in pedagogy. And from there, my passion, kind of dual passion for technology and pedagogy just grew. And here I am today, I suppose. I've been thinking about this question of AI for quite a long time, but it's been very exciting for me to dive even deeper into that in the last year or so. But yeah, fundamentally, I was a teacher myself. I still teach a little bit now, as you mentioned, and I want to get it right. And it strikes me that it's very difficult to get it right for lots of interesting reasons that maybe we can go into today. But yeah, I'm very glad that I'm here because I have a brilliant community and I love what I do.
Yeah. And it's such a good point that there is this assumption that once you've learned something, teaching it will come naturally. And, even when I was in universities, I had a lot of star professors that were really well known. But some of the best professors weren't them, right? They actually were ones who were dedicated to the art of teaching and really looked into how do I make great experience for their students. And those are the classes that I still really remember some of the sort of the actual lessons. So what you just said really resonated. I guess I know you're doing a lot of different research right now. I know you're also tinkering with a product of your own to help this field. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you're cooking to the extent that you're able to share. And in addition to that, I'd love to understand what are some core underlying learning design principles that you think are critical that you're building into the thing that you're working on.
Yeah, I'm very happy to talk about what I'm cooking up. I like that analogy. So yeah, I think to go back to this point I made just now about learning design being hard, I think those of us who are learning designers, and I do identify as that is my job. I design learning. I just now also do that very publicly, and I research how that whole thing works. But I am a learning designer, and I think it's very difficult to be a good learning designer for lots of different reasons. One of them is purely practical. That we as learning designers are, I think because we're misunderstood, we end up doing lots of different things. I always talk about the fact that a learning designer is a bit like a Swiss Army knife. We have 8 different jobs. We are project managers. We have to do budgeting. We have to do communications. We have to do stakeholder management. We have to understand change management. We have to know how to create great materials online. So to use lots of different sorts of technologies, both for design and delivery of blended and online learning. And then amidst all of that, we have to also be pedagogues. We have to also understand how humans learn. And from my experience, many learning designers come into learning design to do just that. Many of them are ex-teachers, for example. And fundamentally, they are driven by this desire to impact students, to do a great job of inspiring them, engaging them, and actually changing how they think and feel, behave in a way that impacts their outcomes. They want to change lives. And so what I've been researching recently is what would it take to enable learning designers to become that version of themselves. And I think one of the great affordances, particularly of AI, and this is going to come as no surprise to anybody, but is that it can take an amount of the 7 other Swiss Army knives away. It can take away, for example, a lot of the administrative work that we do. It can speed up a lot of things that are incredibly slow. It can essentially make us more efficient. But what I'm really interested in is how it might also make us more effective. So how might it make our lives as learning designers who want to understand complex concepts like learning science, like, for example, the selection, how to write brilliant objectives, or how to pick the right instructional strategy to achieve the right goal for the right topic and learner, how to select and build the right activities, how to do evaluation, all of these things. I think learning by AI plus learning design can help to solve some of these big questions. But one thing I do like to do, just to go back to the question about the part of the question about principles, is really just to strip away the technology first and say, well, what are the principles for great learning design? And I think fundamentally it's about, there's 2 things that we need to do. We need to design the right thing, but we also need to motivate our learners to want to do it. One thing we know very clearly, and I think it's an area that we're just not able to focus on enough and do well enough at, but is this concept of intrinsic motivation. So the carrot, not the stick. What's in it for me? And if you think actually here about a product mindset, it's a bit like product market fit. If you think of it as like course market fit or training market fit, it's like if we build it, will they come? And I think sometimes we make the assumption that yes, they will. Because we're going to make them, or because they've paid and so they have that. But that's extrinsic motivation. And what learners really need to be able to thrive is an intrinsic motivation, a perceived value, and also just kind of see themselves reflected somehow in the learning experience. They need to feel like it's for them, it's of value, and it's going to help to drive some sort of bigger progression, be that personal or professional. And so one of the key principles that I like to talk about and to teach is design for intrinsic motivation, making sure that we are designing not just for us, so the thing that we want to design and build, but the thing that also our learners want and need. And I think that's a key principle. The other one that when I'm asked kind of like, how can I get better at design? So one is learner-centeredness. We talk about that as a phrase very often, but we don't often talk about what that means. When I say it, I mean, go deep on who your learner is, what are their demographics, so what's, their age, their location, their language, but also what are their psychographics, so what are their values, what drives them, what will make them want to do this thing. And then I think the other big principle, which I think is always a little bit surprising, but also leads to some value quite quick, it's a quick win, is my principle of minimal viable content. So again, to go back to that first point, there is an assumption that because Phil knows information and has consumed content, I can teach. In fact, just by disseminating information, nobody learns. And yet we're in a situation now, I did some research, and 80% of learning experiences, regardless of whether they're in the workplace or in higher ed, online, blended, in person, whatever, 80% of every learning experience tends to be content. We have a feeling of more is more. But this principle of minimal viable content kind of turns that on its head and says 20% should be content, 80% should be doing something, because when we do something, we learn. And so they're two key principles: designing for intrinsic motivation and designing with minimal viable content, maximum viable activity in mind, really do shift significantly the quality and the way that we think about learning. There are also still very atypical ways of learning. And I think one of the big challenges that we have, and one of the reasons that learning designers haven't had more impact, is that we're set in our ways. I went to university, I learned through lectures, that worked well enough for me. So why wouldn't I do that? If it isn't broken, don't fix it. But I think, so sometimes it can be a bit of an uphill battle. And I think, a part of the winning at learning design will require us to be open to thinking about new and different ways of learning, which might not be what we expect. It might actually be a lot harder work than just sitting and listening.
I think that's right. I mean, harder for both the designer and also the learners, right? Because you're asking to put in more effort and expand more energy, honestly.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I love that observation. Just to pick up on it very briefly, like often when it comes to evaluation, we ask our learners if they're satisfied, and take that as a measure of quality. In fact, the research shows that some of the highest performing learning experiences, so those which lead to the highest achievement, are the ones that are least popular with learners for just that reason. And like often on my own boot camp, which is a boot camp, and it's hard by design, and there's a lot of work goes in, and lots of people are learning just through doing lots of things. Often I'm asked, can I have the version that's just the videos and the PDF? Because this is kind of, it's really not what we expect. And so, yeah, harder for designers, but you're right, very much so harder for the learners too.
Yeah. One question into the two principles you laid out, especially the one on intrinsic motivation, and then you need to reveal a little bit of what you're working on. What do you think are the core drivers of intrinsic motivation when it comes to learning that you think about and you try to build into your learning experiences? Because I generally really agree that motivation is super key, and it's often not explored and maximized enough to make the learning effective.
Yeah, and I think that's because it really isn't easy. I think the way that I do it, the way that I teach it, borrows heavily from two different disciplines. One is marketing. I think as educators, we're not really we take ourselves quite seriously. We're not really trained in any way to think about the sell, but the sell really matters. The positioning really matters, and research shows that. So partly it's about communicating the value of this specifically for the learner, somehow giving them a narrative, a learner transformation story that says you're here now, you will do this, you will have this experience which will act as a bridge to this new world, and this new world has X, Y, Z, and you need to understand what those things are in order to be able to communicate that value. I think there's also an amount of like product management mindset that I borrow from. So just to go back to that concept of product market fit, a course is a product and we want learners to opt into it. And so how do we do that? And how do we do that in product? And the answer is that we understand what's the pain and what's the aspirations of the target here being the learner. And all of this is very difficult because if we keep in mind that most learning designers are being asked by a business to do a thing for a business goal. And so being able to, it's very, very challenging to balance all of those needs with the learner's needs as well. And sometimes we take into account the fact that, for example, they're busy, so let's put it online. But we don't do psychographic profiling. We don't ask, who is this person? What are they struggling with? What are they finding difficult? Where do they want to go in life? And how does this fit into that narrative? It's a lot of work. And there's also an amount of data analysis to it as well, because often some of those insights lie in either like careful semantic analysis of how your learners are communicating about certain problems, or lots of surveying and interviewing. And again, this is like another one of the learning designer's jobs. We also have to be great investigators, or product managers. So I think that in a nutshell is part of the problem, but also part of the key to doing a much better job of driving motivation. It's about understanding product, understanding marketing, understanding psychology. But yeah, as a starting point, if you start to think about both demographics, so the practical stuff, but also psychographics, the motivational stuff, and start to research those two key themes, you will soon start to tap into this whole new world of data that can be, have a really transformative effect on how engaging and motivating and therefore successful your learning experience is.
Yeah. And I love the, borrowing from the right discipline to really pull out some of these principles. And I hadn't quite thought about just how multidisciplinary learning design is until you really made it sort of explicit in this conversation. And yeah, I agree with that. You are really doing a lot of different things as a learning designer.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't even think, Vince, that we've touched on all of them. I'm very interested in your experience, but from mine, it's everything from, there's also evaluation, which is maths. There's data, there's analysis and evaluation design. There's a whole ecosystem. And I think the concept of learning design has evolved from course authoring tools. Like they're the people who initially were called learning designers, the people who could use those tools. And I think there's still that association, and yet the role itself is so much bigger than that. Often it still includes that. So I'm also a video producer. And then so absolutely, it's probably one of the most multidisciplinary disciplines that I have ever come across. And I think all that very, very exciting, creative, challenging, fulfilling when you get it right. But I think it's one of the reasons that learning design is generally being held back. Let's say it could be a lot more productive if only we had a better understanding of exactly what it entailed.
Yeah. No, and I agree with you. For me, I'm not a learning design by trade, but I found myself very interested in learning and learning design. Obviously, now I'm building a company that is grounding itself in learning science and good learning design. And For sure. I mean, the draw for me is that it's so multidisciplinary. I used to call myself an aspiring polymath. I like learning different things. Um, and I used to be in consulting because I liked doing different projects and learning different kinds of industries and skills and so on. And some of the things I had to pick up in consulting, which is ability to ramp up really fast on a topic, ability to manage stakeholders, work with senior stakeholders to all the way down to people who are sort of on the ground doing things, empathize with them, understand their needs, translate it. Like those skills have really helped me transition into the role that I'm in today, where part of my role is actually helping kind of shape and lead the learning design function along with our team. But yeah, definitely a lot there and a lot I still want to learn. So given all of this, how are you thinking about really making this easier for people using AI today? How are you positioning this new thing you're developing and how it's going to help the field?
Yeah, so this started as a research project, I guess, with the hypothesis that we could use, well, the question, hypothesis being we don't know the answer yet, but we're going to test this assumption that maybe we can use AI to make the instructional design process faster, because part of the problem right now is that it is just damn slow. So on average, to go from an idea about a training to a ready-to-go thing, regardless of the mode, it can take anywhere between 6 and 9 months on average and cost anything up to, like $500,000. It's slow, it's very laborious. And what that means, of course, is that it is often outdated by the time it's built. It also definitely means that we have to be selective about what we do and don't teach. We have to prioritize things. And so part of the problem, I think, that's holding learning design back is that it's slow. And so one hypothesis is that maybe we could use AI to help to speed it up. I think historically technology has maybe sped up certain parts of the learning design process, particularly the dissemination part. The LMS has essentially acted as like a digital filing cabinet for content. And so if the goal of that was to disseminate information, then tick. But actually, in terms of impact, it's not been that significant. So we've not really done much with technology in terms of accelerating the velocity of the process, like for really good positive impact on outcomes. So that's one question. Can AI help us speed up the process? And the other is, can AI help instructional designers to make smarter decisions which lead to better learning outcomes? So the hypothesis is that by using AI, we can make learning design faster and higher quality across the board. And so we've been researching this with a number of pilot partners. Large corporates are our first focus because this is where we're finding most pain, I guess, to go back to these product analogies, most pain and most appetite for the process to be faster. And for the impact on outcomes to be better. Maybe this is the moment to share the depressing news that on average, like the highest reported statistic on like impact on capability on the ground in the workplace is around about 12%. So at best, 12% of learning experiences that we design for the workplace actually impact knowledge, skills, capability, which is kind of the whole point. And that's in an industry where we're spending around about $300 billion per year on developing training. So we're spending a lot of money and having very little impact. So I have teamed up with my brilliant co-founder, Gianluca Maro, who is an AI expert. And we have built a prototype for research purposes. So far, this does not exist yet, but the prototype is called Epiphany. And I guess if you think of it, something similar to Figma for UX. Like before there was Figma, UX designers were unable really to meet their full potential because they were using 10 different tools and spending most of their time emailing, phoning people, having meetings, discussing things, collaborating manually, let's say. Also, many UX designers didn't have access to information about what great design looks like for lots of interesting reasons. And that's certainly also the case for learning design. So in my mind, having observed this industry for so long, learning design is now at a very similar point in its evolution as UX was back in the day. It's probably the best part of 10 years now, believe it or not, when cloud computing and Figma first emerged. And we want to do something similar for instructional designers. Right now, instructional designers have to invest in and use anything up to 15 different tools in this, in this crazy process where they're doing 8 different things. And so part of what we're doing is trying to bring all of that into one place and to streamline the workflow. And so one of the goals of Epiphany is to increase the velocity of the process by doing just that. It does that by structuring the process into an optimal process that, for example, requires you to define the business problem before you start to develop objectives. So there's some nice guardrails there that are both for efficiency and effectiveness. And then the second thing that it does is it provides much more specialized AI support than a generalist AI tool like ChatGPT. So think of it as like ChatGPT with a PhD in instructional design or learning science. And so you are able to collaborate with AI in the flow of work in order to make informed decisions, have informed conversations about things like, what's the best instructional strategy here? Or if Epiphany makes a recommendation, why is that better? Or actually, in my context, the problem with this specific team is actually X, Y, Z. So how might that impact our business problem? So what we end up with is really an ecosystem for learning design that makes the process consistent. It makes it faster, but it also empowers learning designers to go really deep on learning design and learning science as a profession. And so, we're seeing some great results so far. I've actually released a paper on my LinkedIn if anybody wants to read it. But we've been doing some baseline testing against human-only designs and designs that were completed by learning designers, but with ChatGPT. And it really does highlight, I think, the value of tools which are designed for specific purposes. So I don't remember the specific statistics, but the quality of the designs that were produced with a learning designer plus Epiphany was significantly higher, and this is blind scoring by expert learning designers, but were significantly higher than those produced by humans alone and those produced by humans with ChatGPT. So really it's just, I guess taking an amount of the labor away of writing great prompts and fine-tuning ChatGPT to be an instructional design assistant in order to just to take away some of our pain, but also to enable human growth, enable us to be experts in our field, and enable us to connect more seamlessly with lots of different stakeholders, all of which happens within this platform. So that's what we're up to.
I love that. And first of all, we probably would love to try it out, even for our company. I've seen something that I have seen is it's as you said, it's probably because of the maturity, where it is on the maturity curve of the field. Today, I think there's just a lot of variation in the quality of instructional and learning design, and not a good set of standards. And you mentioned earlier that 80% of learning experiences are just content delivery, and if great learning science was more widely spread, I think that percentage wouldn't be the case, because most people will realize creating lots of content doesn't actually translate to really any impact other than a check the box exercise. And if you're really trying to get people to behave differently, you need a different strategy than that. And I think what tools like yours might do is to really elevate the field of learning design by allowing everyone to really operate at a minimum at a high level, right? So that we kind of normalize great learning design.
Yeah, and that's definitely the goal. And I think, I'm motivated by the fact that I, as a learning designer, have found it incredibly challenging to be an evidence-based designer, to make evidence-informed decisions, to not be the 80-20 person, because that kind of research is locked away behind ivory towers. You have to literally pay for it in many cases. But even if you get access to it, it's written in code, it's written in, it's theory, it's not practice. And so what we're trying to do is just, as you say, increase access to that and to give, I guess, the right information in the right moment to be able to make decisions which are evidence-based. And what we found in our research is that is very empowering for learning designers who can then go back to, for example, a subject matter expert and say, well, the reason that it shouldn't be 80-20 is because actually XYZ, and therefore the design is this. So there is something, if you imagine the relationship between the learning designer and the subject matter expert, which traditionally is where a lot of the time and energy is spent, I think it kind of sums up the value of Epiphany in that it helps to speed up that collaboration, because for a start, Epiphany helps you to get to a V1 sort of outline without necessarily leaning into the subject matter expert as much. But also because it helps you to, I guess, much more efficiently collaborate. So you don't go to the subject matter expert with a load of questions, you go with a suggested design and a rationale, and then you can collaborate in that piece of work on specific parts and use AI even to automatically implement certain changes which are considered to be, robust. So you're right. It's about trying to just empower people by giving them access to information. And as you say, I really like that idea of elevating and taking an amount of the inconsistency away by just providing access to the right sort of support and information and tools.
Right. In this world that you're helping to create, what do you think is the role of the human learning designer? Where should human learning designers be really focused on improving their craft and skills?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of my favorite questions. And I would refer everybody here to someone who's smarter than me, Ethan Mollick. You probably know him already if you're in the world of learning design. But he's recently written a book and has talked a lot about this. But I am in agreement with him that actually sometimes we think, well, the more that, AI is going to come in and take our jobs, the more we automate things, the less relevant we are as humans. I think, in fact, what all of the trends so far suggest, and let's not forget that AI has been around as long as DNA. This is not new. It's just new to us because we couldn't use it before. But what all of the trends suggest is, in fact, that AI will automate a lot of tasks. It already has. And I know, and I take this seriously, that people have already lost their jobs. But the thing, I think what's interesting to me is that what AI requires is deeper human expertise. AI does not build itself. And so I guess Epiphany is an example of this. ChatGPT is relatively helpful for learning designers. It can, with the right inputs and the right management of validation, give them, a helpful sidekick to generate ideas, write objectives, but it is significantly limited. This is one of the main takeaways from my bootcamp, is that AI needs you. Without being prompted, without being checked by somebody who deeply understands what great looks like, AI is really without value, or will soon become not valuable because we just don't trust it. And so I think what we're going to see, and this is what Ethan Mollick predicts as well, is that in the kind of post-AI world where we're working increasingly with AI, human expertise will become the currency. So this idea, I think people will, including learning designers, will probably find very specific niches where they will become the expert, where they will know how to prompt and guide and validate what AI produces alongside them. I think one interesting analogy is that AI turns us all into teachers and mentors. It requires us to be really great at informing AI, telling it what to do, but also validating what it gives us. So I think what we'll see is maybe the removal of some of the tasks which are low value and or, I guess, highly time consuming. We're seeing this already. By far the most used case of AI in learning design are the bits that are slowest and most expensive. So text to video and translation tools. There's a reason for that. It's an immediate response to the bits that are most painful. And I think we'll see that happening still. But within that, there's still a question, which is, but what are you telling those tools to do? And I think this is where the risk is. I think the risk is that we're using AI to get really efficient at really ineffective practice. And what we might see is just the proliferation of bad. And so the role of the human is to become expert. And I, more than anything else, just keep recommending to learning designers that where they specialize is in understanding how, like, what great looks like. How do you, for example, run great learner needs analysis? How do you write brilliant objectives? How do you decide what the instructional strategy is? Because AI doesn't know, and it requires that expertise in order to thrive, I guess. So I think definitely embrace it if you can, if you're able to. Try not to be scared of it. It is much less powerful, at least for now, than you think it is. And go deep on the expertise that will be required to get value out of it.
I love this point, and I think I definitely agree with it. I definitely agree. Also, from my own experience, you need someone else that's a human to hold the bar on what great looks like. I would say my general experience is AI gives me like a 60-70% answer. It's much like immediately. So that's a real revolution, because now I have a first draft that's like not bad, right? But it's definitely not great. And you need someone who understands that bar and pushes and takes that output and make it great. Otherwise, you're just creating pretty generic stuff that's like on surface sounds acceptable, but then if you start peeling the onion, it's kind of very superficial. Now there's a question for you. This is a question I've asked to a number of people, including actually the last guest, and we all said not sure. In a world where today human expertise gets built through years of work up the ladder. I think Ethan Mollick also talks about this in his book, right? Like, so you start at the bottom of the ladder and you actually work your way through, and you build judgment and you build pattern recognition, and you actually then build the muscle to say, this is what great looks like, this is what mediocre is, this is what bad is. That is currently the talent development model that our society is built on. And none of this gets taught in school, actually. It gets taught at work, right? Now, this is kind of getting disrupted in a pretty major way with a tool like AI, where you actually don't really work up the ladder. So do you have a view on how we will actually create distinctive experts going forward?
It's a great question. And yeah, I think it's kind of, as you say, it's the organizing model for learning and training across the board right now, is that you work, as you say, you work your way up, and usually it takes years. And already I think there are issues. I think, again, Ethan raises this in his book, how already we can't make experts quick enough to be able to, for example, take advantage of new technologies in the medicine world, because that system just doesn't work. It's not rapid enough anymore. And so, like, what does that look like? I mean, I think, again, this is the moment where we could just put the technology to one side and also remind ourselves of the importance of educators, of the importance of learning designers. Like, they are the flavor of human who know how to build expertise. And it will be up to them to continue to help to train maybe AI, maybe what we'll see is the emergence of a system where we still value expertise, but we can get there much more quickly because we are now, supported by AIs that know our trade as well as, the most experienced person in that trade. And there have been experiments here where people have had, for example, a human coach that gives them weekly feedback on their performance, and they action it, and then they get feedback once a week. They're doing this cycle that leads to mastery, that leads to expertise. But there's a kind of parallel track where there is somebody who has an AI which is always switched on, and they progress much more quickly from zero to expert. There's also the BCG, Boston Consulting Group research, which I think is super interesting, which shows an amount of complexity here where if you are completely starting from scratch zero, AI has a significant impact, or can, if it's trained right and if it knows what it's doing, to getting you to expertise. It increases, I think, the velocity of that process by 40%. But if you already know an amount, it actually slows you down and reduces your ineffectiveness. So I think there's some interesting questions there as well about what does that mean for talent? Does it mean that more and more organizations, for example, are going to be hiring complete beginners and investing in AI, or investing in experts that already exist? And what does that mean? So I do think the answer is I don't know, but I think we still need expertise, but I think expertise in the age of AI will be in some ways more equitable. I think nobody will be expected to just regurgitate information. I think the value of the human will lie further up the value chain, which has some very interesting implications for, I don't know, huge things like politics and economics and class systems and all of these things. But yeah, definitely the answer is I don't know, but I'm definitely excited to find out.
Yeah, I'm monitoring for sure very closely how this, and we're both in the arena, trying to also help shape how it plays out. One, I guess, final question I have for you. You have studied so much about the science of learning and human sort of psychology and so on. Are there any beliefs you hold about learning that is non-obvious, not intuitive, or just not talked about enough?
I mean, I have quite a few trolls. I think I have a lot of spiky points of view, for sure. I think the thing about learning that people definitely exaggerate is that it is about, and this is because we've kind of made it about this, but that learning is the act of listening and or reading passively. I think the one thing that could really change the game very quickly, like for some reason we're still building technologies, and this goes back even to AI. So the AI technologies that I mentioned already that are most popular, not just in L&D but across the board, are those which enable us to generate more information, more content.
Like more content really fast, right?
More content really fast, exactly. And it's interesting that that's where the innovation has started. I am on a mission to make sure that it isn't where it ends, because I think actually if you think of the learning design process, the power of AI definitely sits more at analysis and design and evaluation than it ever will at development. Development is nice. It just buys us some time to do very interesting things at the other stages. But I think, the thing with my deeply held belief is that anybody can reach mastery and expertise if they are taught in the right way, and that requires us to rethink the relationship between learning and content. And to the way that I always put it with my students, and I think there's a lot here that we can learn, by the way, from game design, but is serve content as a side dish. Like, what's the thing that the learner is going to do in order to demonstrate the knowledge and skills you want them to show, to develop? And then think, well, what content is required to help them get there, given where they're starting and who they are and whatever. Think of content like a games manual. When you start a board game, you don't read the 300-page manual. You pick it up in the moment of need, because then it has relevance and value. Then you put it back down and you continue on the journey. And I think that's the thing that all of the research says, and yet has not really ever been picked up across the board. We see pockets of innovation. We see particularly over at Harvard, Eric Mazur doing interesting things with lectures to make them more that way. But generally speaking, the education system and the technologies that we build are still about disseminating content and then checking if you heard it. And that, I think, is where the magic lies, is in helping to put the emphasis more on experience than on content. and on using AI to help to design great experiences, but also deliver them. And this is where we get to the AI bot, the AI tutor, but this ability to scale the thing that really makes learning happen, which is great support and feedback, great teaching, and not just content, I think is where the revolution could happen. But only if we wanted to.
I love that. I also love the idea of content as a side dish, not as the main
Main
course,
course. Yeah.
right? Yeah, this was great, Phil. Learned so much. Hearing about all the research you're doing, all the innovation you're doing, and also fighting the battle of the natural innovation of more and more content, actually trying to bring more science into the learning innovation as well. And so thanks for joining and sharing. And, we will obviously continue chatting off of this, and I'll be following your journey. But I think it was great. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Vincent. Yeah, I learned a lot too. So appreciate your time. Thanks a lot.
By the way, one last thing. What's the best way people can follow your work, your journey? Do you want to share with the folks?
Yeah, sure. So please do follow me on LinkedIn. I have a beautiful, brilliant community of predominantly learning designers, also educators, and we talk about all things learning science and AI. I have a free weekly newsletter that I put out that just keeps people on top of the research that I and others are doing. And I also have a bootcamp if you're interested in getting hands-on with me, where we design a learning experience end-to-end using both learning science and AI, and it's pretty wild, and I love doing it. So yeah, just give me a shout. I'm always happy to connect with people and learn from them.
Yeah, thumbs up here. I love your newsletters. I love the stuff you post. So I think everyone can really benefit from following you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining.
Cheers.